I have one question. I have just one question, because as I studied the facts and I took a look at the numbers, and I know what the gateway cities, are there any plans, and again, it's kind of like a spot in the state that says, for affordable housing, 10%, 11%. We're at 13 or 12 and a half, whatever that number may be. Are there any intentions to increase and sign up for more affordable housing in Salem? And what will that do to us?
Yeah, so there is no plans underway to create a 40R district. The 40R district that provides communities with annual benefits for creating an affordable housing zone. I guess I just want to stop for 1 second. We have lots of folks in Salem who are hardworking, who rely on affordable housing. Affordable housing has many different meanings for many different folks, and if you look at what those income guidelines are for affordable housing, I'd hazard a guess that you or your family members, your kids, would all really be able to benefit from some of these affordable housing. They're not always the state subsidies that you think of in the worst light. There's first-time homebuyer programs. There's lots of ways, housing rehab programs, that affordable housing. It just feels a little to me sometimes that gets a bad rap unnecessarily so when we're all struggling, especially in this time. That being said, there are no plans underway for a 40R. We have a lot of development happening in the Blubber Hollow neighborhood. They're all market rate. The planning board will likely require they have a 10% affordability requirement, and that's because we don't want to drop down below the 10% figure. The trigger on the 10% affordable housing, if you don't have a minimum of 10% affordable housing in your city, then you qualify for what's called 40B housing, where a developer can come in and override your local zoning with a comprehensive permit to put in more. So as we develop more affordable, more market rate housing, it's important that we keep that threshold, and frankly that we have that diverse mix. One of the things that I think makes Salem so livable is that we have this great diversity, that there are Chestnut Streets next to Perkins Streets, around the corner from Derby Street, and not far from Highland Avenue and Witchcraft Heights. And it's all in 8 square miles. Works pretty well. It makes it more challenging from a public schools perspective. It can make it more challenging from other perspectives as well. But I think it's one of the things that's part of our history and our fabric that's built in, that we have this great row of captain's mansions around the corner from tenement housing. And it seems to have worked in here as part of our history. We're not looking to make more of one or the other. We're looking to revitalize our city in a way that we can all be proud of. So there are no efforts underway to create large-scale affordable housing developments on Bridge Street or anywhere else. Anything else? While I'm here, before I scoot out to Salem High School for a school committee meeting, I hate to talk and leave, but I do want to get there. So, yep. Michelle?
Along with 40R would come additional educational grants under 40S, right? So where are we getting our educational grants currently, through what program?
So we have a combination of state aid that comes to us for our schools, primarily Chapter 70. It's the biggest complement of local aid that we get. So the city's revenue stream, if you think of it in percentages, about 50% comes from property taxes, about 25% comes from the state, and about 25% from other local sources, building permits, other revenue streams. The 25% of the local aid that we get, the vast majority of that is for students through the Chapter 70 program. In fact, the state this year increased that funding. It's based on a per student head. It's roughly $4,500 to $5,000 per student. It can fluctuate depending upon what's happening with state aid. On top of that, you have access for grants. Most of that's based on your income needs within your community. And frankly, we have a very needy population in terms of our schools that allows us to benefit. And then they have these gateway city distinctions. The state has said, we care so much about gateway cities, we're going to prioritize funding in those places. So we have opportunity right now for 2 particular grants within gateway city education, set-aside grants that you can apply for, and we're anxiously doing that, looking forward to it, along with your transportation and other infrastructure improvements. You're prioritized by virtue of the fact that we're a gateway city.
So is that where the Bentley grant came from?
The Bentley grant is actually, it comes from the state, but it's actually federal money. It's a federal redesign grant of $500,000 per year for the next 3 years, specifically targeted for any schools that are level 4 that have seen that flat performance and standardized test scores. But
So are we receiving any gateway city money for our schools right now?
So we receive local aid. We have not, the Gateway City grant that I just mentioned, the 2 of them, we're just putting those applications in. I hope we'll get them. It's nice to not have to compete with 351 cities and towns and only to have to compete with 24. And we think that we're pretty progressive. Folks, we do have a really robust grant-making team in the city, grant-writing team. We go after a lot of grants, and we've been thankfully very successful. So at the present time, we don't have any specific Grantway City aid dollars. We haven't accepted 40R. nor do I think we have any proposals to do that. So the communities that do accept 40R, and the ones that I'm familiar with, they've specifically targeted, say, one parcel or one area. They've got a development sort of proposed for it, and they're just taking advantage of perhaps the infrastructure assistance or the dollars. But I don't think, frankly, there have been too many 40R projects even approved statewide. Anything else?
You're saying that we're getting gateway funding, and there are no obligations that go along with that funding?
So the Gateway Cities Education Grant is a special grant the state just approved this year to try and provide help in two areas. One is career academies, so for high school students, specifically trying to get them exposed to careers, especially students who may not find themselves on a college track. We're looking at healthcare, given our healthcare cluster on the North Shore, training students as EMTs and the like, personal care assistants, home health aides, so that they can go to college but have some exposure to the healthcare industry. The second grant will be an ELL summer camp. Both of those come with, they're one-year grants only. There's no strings attached. It's called a Gateway Cities Education Grant because it's only eligible for gateway cities. It is not a 40R designation. It is nothing like that. It's a separate piece of legislation that very few gateway cities have even taken advantage of at this point. Anything else? Feel free to reach Bill. Moments from a clean getaway is what that means.
How do you feel about the terminology, urban sprawl? Does that not smack of towns like Beverly and Swampscott and Ipswich and Rockport and Boxford and Danvers kind of get a free ride on the backs of Salem?
So all of those communities that you mentioned are under their 10% threshold, which means developers almost have a get-out-of-jail-free card. They can come in and do what's called a 40B project and develop affordable housing at a higher rate. Those communities, many of them, don't also qualify for some of the incentives that we do. And they don't have some of the challenges that we have. It's a much more homogeneous population in many of those communities. They don't have the diversity. They don't have the influx of immigrants. I think what the state has said is if we have these older urban places, the Fitchburgs, the Haverhills, the Salems, how do we invest in them in such a way that takes advantage of the resources that they currently have and provide them with some incentives to redevelop their downtowns? The policies, the ideas, the concepts aren't bad, but it still needs local control. This is not coming from the State House and being squashed down. Any city or town, every city and town that wants to partake of that 40R funding or those funds you mentioned that gateway cities are eligible for schools has to agree to it through a zoning change. And that's not anything that I see on our agenda at all right now.
So again, just one final question, because I've done too much research. If it ever came to designating and getting zoning for 40R, would that be left up to the city council?
Two-thirds vote of the city council.
Or would you raise that to the public making that decision like we did with the CPA?
Well, the CPA, that legislation has to go to the ballot.
I
Zoning
understand
is a two-thirds vote of the city council. I don't know that there's even an initiative petition process that you can, I don't know lawfully if you can do that.
Just 1 second, I'm really sorry for
Yeah.
this. There's 3 cars that are going to be probably towed in the next few minutes if they're not moved. Sorry.